Hey there! So far in this course we've been talking about the basics of the jQuery statement. And we looked at the two fundamental components to a jQuery statement. And that is essentially selecting or targeting specific DOM elements of a web page and then modifying them in some way or form, right? We looked at how to hide or fade elements or how to apply a CSS style to a particular element of a web page, right? So jQuery is really great for targeting or selecting specific elements on a web page and modifying them in some way or form. That's a theme we're going to continue to master as we proceed in this course. Target specific elements of the DOM and modifying the elements by invoking a function on it as you've been seeing. Well, it turns out that there is a third really important concept in jQuery. And you're going to get plenty of practice in this course with this third concept. And that's called events. Events are exactly what they sound like. When a user does something on the web page, such as hover their mouse over some text, move the mouse or click a link or a button or enter some keystrokes in their keyboard, these are all user-conducted events that are happening on our web page. So jQuery is awesome at handling these events, right? This allows us the ability to perform some action when an event takes place. When a user does something on our web page, we're able to capture that event and do something. So in this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to that concept. So let's get started. I have Atom already opened here. We can open this lesson's project and click on jQuery tutorial 5. And let's just open that up, and it's just one index file, and in the JS folder we have this the jQuery library here as always, and then we have this click events.js that you're going to be filling out. Okay, so this is just a basic vanilla web page. There's nothing on here, so let me just add some things and we'll get some practice with HTML in the process. So I'm going to add a title. We'll call it Learn Event Handling. We'll close that tag, and then the next thing I'm going to do to this web page is add a button. So it's going to have it's going to be an input tag. The type is going to be button, and the value that I'm going to give, this is what appears in the button, the text that appears in the button. I'm just going to call it submit. Okay, and we're going to give this tag an ID, and we're going to call it first BTN. This is going to be our first button in the course. And after this, I'm just going to put a paragraph tag, and we'll say this is a sentence. So in this lesson, the demo that I want to show you is when a user clicks the button, this paragraph tag should disappear. As a matter of fact, let me give this paragraph an ID, and I'll just say that this is a statement. Okay, so we're giving the ID attribute to this paragraph, and that's called statement. So let's launch the web page here. That's this guy right here in jQuery tutorial 5. Double click that, and this is our web page. Okay, this is the submit button that I was talking about, and for this lesson we're going to implement the functionality that when the user clicks this button, this sentence should disappear. Okay, when the user clicks this should disappear. So how are we going to do that? Well, first we're going to capture the event when the user clicks this button, and then as soon as that happens, we're going to hide by calling the hide method that you've seen already. So let me close that, and let's go back here, and that jQuery code is going to be in this file called clickEvent.js. I don't want to add that in the script tag down here. I want that to be I want the jQuery code to be in this clickEvent.js file. So the first thing we're going to need to do is figure out what is going to be the target. So we're going to target this guy right here when the user clicks this button, right? And the ID for this element is first button. So let's first put our jQuery function here. In our selector, it's going to be the # because this is an ID, and it's called first BTN. Okay, so that's the button that we're targeting. And the next thing, this is new syntax that you're about to learn, is called on. And this is the key to most events that you're going to learn in this course. On this selector, when something happens, we're going to capture using this on function. It's going to make a lot of sense in just a second. So on what? On click. So when a user clicks the first button element, right, we want something to happen. And the first argument is going to be the kind of event. Now there's many different types of events. There's keystroke, enter, there's mouse hover, there's double click. In this case, it's just one click. When a single click takes place, we want something to happen. So the first argument to this on is going to be the click event. That's the first argument. The second argument is actually going to be a function. And just like all jQuery statements, we're going to end this statement with a semicolon. Okay? So this is basically saying that do this when the click event takes place on this element. Okay? So what do we do here? The code in here will be executed when the user clicks the first button element. Okay, and we could choose to put whatever we want in here. So we're going to actually hide this. We don't want this sentence to be displayed once the user clicks the submit button. So for that, all we have to do is, well, we need a selector, right? So we first identify or target what we are going to hide, and that's going to be the p tag dot hide. Okay, now this paragraph has an ID, doesn't it? Let's go back here. Notice that it has an ID called statement. So since this is the only paragraph on the web page, it's okay. We don't have to put that ID there. jQuery is going to know exactly which paragraph we're talking about. But just to be more specific, I want to add the pound sign here with that statement. Okay, we're specifically targeting that paragraph in case we add more paragraphs in here. We don't want all of the paragraphs to disappear. Right now there's just one, but it has an ID of statement. We should use that ID in our jQuery code. So that particular paragraph, we're going to hide it when the user clicks the first button element on the web page. So now let's reload our web page. Let's go back to that folder where we have this index.html file, double click it, and hit the submit button, and whoops, this sentence is not disappearing. Okay, and I want you to take a guess as to why that's happening. The reason is because we haven't linked the jQuery code with the HTML code. Let's go back to Atom. This is our click event.js. This is where our jQuery code is. In the previous lesson, I showed you how to use this code or type this code directly in the index.html. But now, since it's a separate file, we want to link that file here in the index.html. So that's going to be a very simple step. We just copy this, and I'm just going to paste that because it's just quicker that way rather than typing it out. So in the JS folder, we have this click event file, right? That's right here. So all I have to do is put that right here, click event.js. And now we've linked that file. Just like we're linking the jQuery library, we've linked that file here in this HTML page, and now it should work. So let's relaunch that web page, and here it is. If you click on submit, notice that it disappears. Okay, refresh the page again, click submit, and that sentence disappears. So just like how we have a button here, we can have a regular hyperlink on our web page, and when a user clicks that, a similar thing can happen, right? So we don't really necessarily need this particular button to be clicked on. We can have pretty much any element be clicked on by the user, and we can capture that particular event. So let's try an h4 tag, and I'm going to say that this is another sentence before the one we want to hide. Okay, and I'm going to give this element the ID, and I'm just going to call it target. So now this particular target I can reference here in click event. Instead of first button, it's going to be called pound target. Okay, and now anytime you click on that h4 element, it's going to hide this sentence. And now if I click here, whoop, notice that it disappears the second sentence. All right, so it's working as expected. So this could essentially be any kind of element. I can have a tag here and put a hyperlink, href and give some link here. Let me just put a pound sign for now. Typically when you're coding and you don't know the URL up front, you could just put this hash sign and that will take place of the link, and you've probably seen that quite a bit when as you've been browsing around different websites. But anyway, this is the A tag, and inside of here I'm going to give the text click here. So when a user clicks on this hyperlink, it's going to hide this sentence. So let's try that just to make sure it's working. Click here. Looks good. Now just like how we have the click event, there are a lot of other events that you can explore on your own, and I'll show you a resource where you can look those up, but let's go over a few more before moving on to the next lesson. Just like we have the click event, we can change this to double click. DBL click. Save this file and let's refresh the page. And now if I click this once, nothing happens, okay? But if I double click it, notice that the sentence disappears, okay? So this event looks for a double click. Now there are a few others. For example, there's mouse enter. As soon as the mouse enters the target, whatever that is, whether it could be a button, it could be a sentence, it could be a panel, as soon as your mouse enters that region, the code that's in here is going to execute, and it's supposed to, of course, hide. So let's try this one out. Mouse enter. I'm going to refresh the page here, and I'm going to enter my mouse onto the click here region, and boom. Notice that as soon as I entered, that text disappeared. Okay? So just like mouse enter, there's also mouse leave. Let's refresh the page and you can see how that works. So it's going to do exactly what it sounds like. As soon as I enter, nothing happens. Okay, I'm on this target. Now, but when I leave, boom, there you go. That sentence disappeared. So you have a variety of events to choose from. jQuery makes it so easy to implement this advanced functionality that would require a lot more code if we were using JavaScript. Now I'll show you a resource on this website called W3 Schools. It has pretty much all of the events you can think of, and we're going to be going through a lot of these in this course as we make progress. You can check out the event methods. That's what these are, and if you click on next, there's also jQuery effects methods, like if you want to fade in and fade out or hide, as you've seen. There's just a bunch of options here that we're going to be covering in this course, but this is a great site, w3schools.com. It has a tutorial there, but you don't have to take the tutorial. You can use these tables that they provide as reference. They have a great reference sheet that's pretty comprehensive with all the different terminologies. Now you don't have to waste your time memorizing this stuff, okay? Whenever you need to do something in jQuery, if you need to for example, fade something in or out, or if you want to drag and drop functionality, chances are that method already exists in jQuery. You just have to quickly Google it and it'll take you to a place like this, which has all of the syntax that you could possibly need to implement that. So don't spend any time memorizing that fade to. The to is supposed to be capital with a T and lowercase for certain other methods. Don't worry about that stuff. You can always Google that, and you're going to get plenty of practice in this course implementing some of these on your own. So keep this URL in mind. It's w3schools.com/jQuery jQuery effects.asp. Okay, this is the URL for the various effects, and you'll find the events URL at the same place. Now back here in our jQuery code, the mouse leave is an event. Same thing as double click or click. These are all events that take place when the user is interacting with the DOM. But the effects are things that happen, fancy things such as sliding, hiding, and so on. This is the hide effect. So I want to go over a few more effects in this lesson, but before that, let me add another component to this DOM. I'm going to add a div, and we'll give it the ID. We'll call it box, and the style, let's just give it some style elements so that you can actually see the div. We'll give it a width of 500 pixels. The height is going to be 100 pixels, and let's just give it a border of 1px solid, and it's going to be the color black. So we'll just put 3 zeros there. And let me also give it a background yellow. And let's close off that div. And inside of here, I'm just going to put a simple statement. It'll say, this is a rectangle. Okay, so let's refresh the page in our browser. And this is the div. The first thing I want to show you is the ability to show this div. Let me start off by first changing the display property of this rectangle to none. You want to make sure you have a semicolon after the yellow, and then we have a display none. Okay, and now instead of hide, I can show this box. Let's first target that box. It's the ID box, and then I can just do show. So let's refresh the page, and when I click on this button, the box is appearing. So that is the show effect. Now we don't need this line anymore. I just commented it out. Now to hide and show things, instead of using hide and show, you can use something called toggle. And this basically shifts between hiding and showing the elements. So let's refresh the page here. Let's click and it shows the box. If I click it again, it hides the box. Click show, click hide. It basically keeps adjusting that display property of the element to show and hide it. Okay. Another effect is called slide down. So, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It slides down the image into view. So let's refresh the page. If I click it, I expect the box to slide down. And notice that it slides down here. There's an argument to this, and that will basically determine the speed at which the element is going to slide down. 1000 milliseconds is 1 second. So let's refresh the page here. Let's click it and notice that it's coming down a little slower. I could change this to 2 seconds by changing it to 2000, and it's of course going to dramatically be slower. Let's move on to something called slide up, and that's going to do exactly what the slide down does in the opposite direction. So instead of slide down, it's going to be slide up, and let's give it 2000. Let's refresh the page here. Click on this button. Oh, by the way, the box didn't appear, and the reason for that is slide up is used to hide something that's already visible, and it hides it in a sliding up fashion, like you have with blinds. You pull the string and the blinds go up, you sort of hide it. That's what slide up does. So we need to change this display property for this particular method to work. Instead of doing that, I could just use, outside of this function, I could just have the first line show the box and just do dot show, and that will make the box appear when the page loads. So here's our box. Now if I click it, slide up will basically slide it up. So let me comment out this box showing on the first line, because we have some more effects to go over that require the box to be hidden already. So we have slide up and slide down. There's also something called slide toggle. So we could do dot slide toggle, and this will basically shift between showing and hiding the particular box, and it'll just toggle back and forth. Just like we had this toggle method up here, it's going to slide toggle it. So let's refresh the page. Let's click it. It toggles it in a sliding fashion. Click it again, it toggles it again. Sliding fashion. Okay. So that's slide toggle. Next thing is fade in. Okay. This is going to fade the box into view. Let's refresh the page, click the button, and notice that it sort of fades in. I can adjust the time it takes to fade in by just giving it a parameter such as 1000, and refresh the page. Click it here and notice that it fades slowly. Okay. So that's fade in. As you can imagine, we also have fade out, and it does the opposite thing. So let's refresh the page, and of course notice that it's not going to work because fade out is supposed to hide it. If it's already hidden, this is not going to do anything. So let's first show it with this first line, refresh the page, click it, and notice that it's hiding in a fading way. Okay. Now there's another thing called fade to, and you can set the opacity of how visible you want this element to be. The first argument is the speed at which that's done, and the second element is the level of opacity. So it could be, for example, 0.5, and it can't be greater than 1. So 1 is 100%, 0.5 is 50%. So let's refresh the page. Oh, and it's fade 2, not fade out. We've already seen fade out. So it's fade, capital T, 2. So it's going to fade to the opacity of 0.5 in 1 second. So let's refresh the page, click here, and notice that it's sort of faded in this level of opacity. If I change this to 0.2, you'll see that it dramatically decreases the opacity almost to the point where it's, barely visible. And then if I change it to 0, that's going to completely fade it out. So just the thing to keep in mind, the max level of opacity is 1, which basically, shows the entire element. There's also something called fade toggle. As you can imagine, we had slide toggle, we had regular toggle, we also have something called fade toggle. And this will allow us to toggle back and forth to showing and hiding the element, but in a fading fashion. Let's refresh the page, click here, and notice that it's fading it out. Click it again, notice it's fading it in. So these effect methods are pretty fancy, and they, if you were to implement this in JavaScript, it would require a lot more code. So jQuery does make these effects very easy to implement. But I want you to keep in mind that this is not what jQuery is all about. You can't say you know jQuery just because you've learned these special effects and know a few events such as click and double click. Where jQuery really shines is selecting or targeting the DOM elements and then manipulating them in some way or form, right, in various different ways. And we'll get plenty of practice in this course on how to do exactly that, how to manipulate the different DOM elements, change the structure of the DOM, and how to target the specific things we want. So don't spend too much time learning the differences between, these fancy effects. The core of jQuery is about selection of elements and manipulating them, and we'll be making advances towards that as we proceed. Alright, so I'm going to wrap up this lesson. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hey there, welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how to modify the HTML that is already on the web page using jQuery, and how to update the text, the inner text of the HTML, and I'll show you what I mean. This is jQuery tutorial 6, so make sure you open the right project. And I have this sentence here with the class called dope. And of course you can name these classes anything you want, and that's why I chose such a not so professional name. And then down here we have a button, and what's going to be inside of the button is this word replace. And when you press it, what it's going to do is it's going to replace the content of this H2 tag. Okay, it's going to change that sentence. So how do we modify the text that's in here? Well, we're going to do that in the insert.js file. This is where our jQuery code is going to reside. So what we're going to do first is target using a selector. And what are we going to target? We're going to target this button. And the ID for this button is btn_main. So I'm just going to, and that's an ID, so we need a hash sign with the name of the button, and then this is going to be an event when a user clicks on the button. It's going to do something, and of course we need to wrap whatever is going to be done inside of a function. Okay, so when the user clicks this button element, it's going to execute the code that's in here, and what that's going to be is we're going to replace the text that is stated here. So as you can see, you'll learn how to replace me, and we're going to do that inside of this function. So the way to do that first is to target the thing that we want to replace, and we of course need a CSS selector for that, and the ID, not the ID, the class for this H2 is dope. So we have to put a dot, not a hash, but a dot, because we're referencing classes. So we write dope, and then we use this new function called text. And the text is going to take in as an argument the statement that is going to replace what's currently there. So it's going to say this is new replacement text. Okay? So let's test this out, and also make sure that the file insert.js is linked properly, and we have another style sheet that's linked, which we'll come to in just a little bit. So open up your browser and refresh the page, And this is what we have so far. So you'll learn how to replace me. When we click on this replace button, it's going to change this like that. And this is the new replacement text. So what we did inside of this jQuery code, we first targeted the element that we want to change, and then we put the dot text, and the text that was inside of the H2 here, H2 tags, this text got replaced by what we sent to this method. Now you don't always have to pass in a value to text. If I get rid of this and just leave it like that, and make sure to put a semicolon at the end, if I just leave it like this, it's going to actually just read whatever is inside of this element, okay? And I can display it to the screen by doing an alert. And you may be familiar with this alert function. It's used quite heavily in JavaScript demos when you're learning about JavaScript. We're going to use the same function, and it's going to display whatever is in here in an alert box, okay? So let's refresh our page, and when I hit replace, notice that it says you'll learn how to replace me. So that text, whatever it was in that H2 tag, that was basically captured. That sentence was captured, and it was put into this dialog box. Okay, so to the alert method, we're passing the thing that we want to get the data from, and then we invoke this dot text method on this thing to get the statement that was there. So this is to read the information from this element, and if we want to change the information for this element, we pass in an argument to the text method like we did just a minute ago. Let me revert back to the way it was, like that. Okay, and make sure, I made a mistake. I was supposed to put a semicolon here, so make sure you do that. Put a semicolon at the end of every statement. Now when you want to change the value that goes into certain things, text doesn't always work. Text works for tags like H2 and H4 and the paragraph tag and so on, as well as, you know, the strong tag, and there's so many different tags that it works for. But when you have a button and you want to, for example, replace what's displayed in the button, right? So here it says the word replace inside of this button. If I wanted to change what is shown here, I would have to change this value to say something else. So we can actually do that inside of this on click of this button. We can change what is shown in that button by first targeting the particular button, and that's going to be btn_main, and then instead of dot text, we're going to use dot val. Okay, so there's a new function you're learning about, and we give the data that we want to place inside of that button. So I'm just going to call it double click me, and that semicolon there. So now when a user clicks on this button, not only is it going to change the text that is for this dope element, it's also going to modify what is written inside of that button. So instead of the word replace, it's going to show double click me. So let's test this functionality out. I've saved the file up back there, so if I refresh this page, we should be good to go. If I press replace, it's going to change the sentence and also change what is displayed in the button. So let's click there, and notice it's saying double click me. So that seemed to work. So now if I double click it, obviously nothing happens. That's just a sentence that I sort of placed inside of this button. But let's implement the functionality that when we double click it, this text is changed back to the way it's supposed to be. And I want you to take a moment to try that out on your own. Pause the video if you have to, and try that out on your own, and then you can resume to watch my solution. All right, hopefully you had a chance to try that out. All we need to do is, it's going to be very similar to this code that we have already. I'm going to copy it and paste it down here. Instead of click, we're going to have DBL, click. So this is going to capture the event when the user double clicks this particular button. When the user double clicks this button, we want something else to happen. Instead of this new replacement text, we're going to change that to the way it was. And what is that text? That is right here. You'll learn how to replace me. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it inside of these quotes here. So now we're changing back the value if the user decides to double click. Okay. And not only that, when the user double clicks, we want the value that's displayed inside of the button, we want that to change back to the word replace as it was before inside of the HTML. We want this to show in the button when the user does double click the button. Okay, so let's test this one out. Let's refresh the page here, and when I click replace, this is new replacement text. Okay, so this got replaced. Now if I click this once, nothing happens. All right, but when I double click it, notice it goes back to the way it was. All right, so both of these are events that take place. We can either click on this button or we can double click on this button, and when this event is triggered, the code that's in here is executed. Okay, so this is a sort of a review from the previous lesson. The main thing that you learned is that you can change the data that goes into different HTML elements by changing their text. So whatever was in this dope class, we had this data and we replaced it with this, and then we replace it yet again with this. Not only can you change the text that is displayed inside of the tags, right? Not only can you change this text, but you can actually change this entire HTML to be something different. And the way to do that is you use the .html method instead of the .text, and I'll show you how to do that. Let's just first create another button that is going to do that for us. So this button is going to be called change HTML, and the ID for this button is going to be btn new. So now when a user clicks on this button new, it's going to change the HTML, and I'm going to show you how that looks. So we first need to target this new button called btn_new, and then on the, let's make it a click event, it's going to execute this logic that's going to be inside of this function, and make sure you put the semicolon here, and inside of here we're going to target the dope class. So it's going to be .dope, and we're going to change that HTML, whatever is there, we're going to change it to show the following, and we're going to wrap it inside of these single quotes, and whatever's inside of here, I want that to be bold, and I want it to be applied a particular class, and the class is inside of the style sheet, style.css. You should already have this. We're going to apply this cool class to that text, and that's going to be done here inside of insert.js. So let me show you how that works. So whatever dope contains, I'm going to change that HTML to be bold, and I'm going to give it the class called cool. Right? That class exists in the CSS file that you should have. And then I'm just going to say, hey there, this is HTML. Okay? And I'm going to close that bold tag right there. So not only are we making this bold, but we are also giving it a CSS class that's been defined in this style.css file that you should have already. Okay, so now let's load up our page again, refresh, and we should see this other button called change HTML. If I click it, notice that it's not. Take a guess as to why this is not working. Let's go back to our code. All right, I want to see if you could spot this. The reason why this is not working is because button new is an ID, isn't it? If we go back to the index.html, notice that the ID attribute is button new. And how do you reference IDs? We use the hash sign. Just like we're doing with this button main up here, we need to have a hash sign here. Okay, so now it should work. So let's load that page up again, refresh, and then click on HTML, and notice that the CSS is applied. Okay, and if I click on replace, it replaces the text that was inside of dope. If I double click it, it's going to change that text back to the way it was, and then I can of course either way, this change HTML is going to be applied to whatever text is there, because it just takes whatever's at dope at this stage, and it's going to apply this HTML. All right, so there are two methods you learned about, well, actually three methods you learned about in this lesson. The val method, which is going to change the value of a button, the word that is to be displayed. The text takes an argument. It's going to change the text of the tags in the HTML, and then the HTML method is going to change the actual HTML for that particular element. Now, really quickly, let's look at style.css. Notice that it just multiplies the size of the current text by 2, and then it changes this to green, and as you can see, that's pretty much in line with what we expect the design to look like. So this is another way that you can modify the design of elements inside of HTML by using this .html, and you give the particular class. Now, you've already seen the add class method, which is actually a better way to change the design of certain elements, but this is just another technique that I wanted to show you. So these are very important methods that we looked at in this lesson. Know them like you know you're at the back of your hand. The text, the val, and the HTML. All right, we can change the HTML, we could change the text, and we could change the value that is shown inside of a button. And if we get rid of the argument of .text, then all it does is retrieves the existing text, whatever it is, for that particular element. And as you can imagine, the .val does the same thing. So instead of, for example, changing, let me show you this. Down here, I can display the value of whatever is inside of this button. #btn new .val. So instead of giving an argument, I'm just going to close the parenthesis right there. Okay, so now it's just going to get the value of whatever is in this button, and I can just alert it to the screen. Okay, like that. So let's refresh the page here and click on change HTML, and notice that it says the value of whatever is inside of this button. It's giving us that value in the alert. Hit OK, and it's going to change the HTML. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up this lesson. Coming up next is going to be a project where I ask you to do a variety of things to an HTML page, and it's going to have the instructions listed. So you're going to be using all of these methods that you learned about: text, val, add class, fade in and stuff, or hide. You're going to be using the different events that you learned about: click, double click, mouse enter, and so on. So make sure you take the time out to complete the assignment on your own. That's going to make all the difference in this course. I want you to retain all of this information as you go along, so by the time you're done with this course, you know all of this stuff like the back of your hand, because you've put in the time and effort to complete the assignments. That's what it's all about. So make sure you take the time out to complete those assignments. Hi there, welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn about how to take data that is entered by your user and store it into a variable, and then display the value of that variable. So this is data that a user enters into a text box of a form, and you should already have experience in HTML on how to design a form, but I'll go over it really quickly. This is the HTML page, index.html, in the project jQuery tutorial 7. I've already set this up here for you, and you should have this code. So the first form is right here with the method post. It's going to be a post HTTP request. That's how all forms are submitted on a web page. And this is the input, the first text box here with the ID entered word. And then we have the submit button down here. This is going to submit this form. Down here we have a second form, and this is of course also a post method with 2 text boxes with their IDs. And I'm going to show you how we can work with this form and how to capture data that the user enters into the text box. So let's first take a look at how this looks on a web page. This is the first form right here, and this is the second form down here. So what we're going to learn about first is when the user types something and clicks on the submit button, we want that information to be displayed on the screen. We can alert it, alert the value to the screen, or display it somewhere on the web page. So let me show you how to do that first. Now the important piece to keep in mind is that this is a submit input. The submit input submits this entire form using a post request. So first let's locate this form. So the first thing we need here is the jQuery function and then the selector. What are we looking for? Well, we're looking for this form element. So let's do that first. We need the form and then .on, and this is going to be a new event that I'm about to show you. It's called the submit event. When we're submitting forms, we are going to be using this submit event. And when this submit button right here for this form is clicked, this submit event is going to take place and the form will be submitted using the post method, the HTTP post. So following the event is what we want to happen once that event takes place, and that's going to be down here in this section. So I want whatever text entered in the text box by the user, I want that text to be displayed to the screen, and we're going to alert that information to the screen. So back on the index.html page, whatever is entered into this text box, we're going to display that when the user clicks on the submit button. So let's first get the CSS selector in there. We need the jQuery function. The selector is going to be input. This is the tag, right? That's this tag right here, the input tag, and then we need the pound sign because this is the ID. So we could do pound entered word. Now, by the way, sometimes I refer to this as pound or hash. I mean the same thing. It's interchangeable. Now that we have targeted the element that we are looking for, we just need the val method that you've already seen. And this is going to read whatever is in this particular element. Now, if I wanted to display what has been entered, I could just, for example, alert that to the screen like this. Okay, so into this alert function, I'm passing this as the argument. Now let's see how that works. Let me open up the web page, refresh this page here, enter some word. I'm going to say hello and hit the submit button, and boom, there you go. It alerts to us what we entered. Okay, now this is all being done in one line, but we can actually capture whatever value is in that text box, whatever the user enters. We can capture that into a variable first and do further things with it. So let me show you how that works. Let me get rid of this alert and make sure to end your statements with a semicolon. Now let's capture whatever this is going to be into a variable. There is some special syntax for that in JavaScript. It's the same thing in jQuery, and that's the var keyword. And this keyword is just saying that this is a variable declaration. Whatever follows is going to be a variable name. So I'm just going to call that variable entered word. Okay, so whatever word was entered, it's going to be captured into this variable. And now on the next line, I can, for example, alert the value of entered word by just passing it into this alert function. So let's see how that looks. It should work exactly the same way. I refresh the page, enter the word there, for example, and then hit submit, and notice that there is printed. Okay, so we use this selector to first target the input text box, and then we invoke the .val method on there to capture whatever to retrieve the data that was entered, and then we store it into this variable, and then later we are printing that variable to the screen. Now let's see what we can do with this form. For the second example, I'm going to show you how to take value from one of the text boxes and fill in another text box, or even the same text box. So we're basically auto-filling a form, and you must see this all the time when you fill in forms online. If you enter a zip code, for example, it automatically fills in the city and state. So we're going to sort of just do a rough draft of that and hard code the city that's displayed here. So let me show you how that works. Now that second form is down here, and it's following this text enter location, which you saw. So after this text, we have this other form. The first text box is right here, where we're going to enter the zip code, and then the second text box is here, where I want the city and state to be displayed. And that's going to happen when the user clicks on this get location button. So now notice that we don't have an input type of submit in this form, right? We don't have this submit button in this form. We just have a regular button. So when a user clicks on this button, we want things to happen in this form. So I'm going to target this particular button in this case, not the form, but the actual button, and then look for the particular text boxes that we want to modify. So back here in the form.js, let's get another CSS selector, and it's going to be the button with the ID called LOC_button. Okay, that's this ID right here, this button. Now once we target the element that we want on the click event, we want something to happen. Okay, and we're going to wrap those details, those instructions on what to happen in this function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a variable, and I'm just going to call it entered zip. And that's going to get the data from the form in which the user enters, and that's going to be the input tag with the hash entered zip underscore zip, or whatever the ID was. I believe it's entered zip. Let's just double check here. All right, this is the input tag. All right, this is what we're targeting, and this is the ID entered zip. So I'm targeting the correct element here. So let's close that statement with a semicolon, and now I'm just going to hard code. I'm going to hard code what gets displayed here. So when a user enters any old zip code, it's just going to show one city and state. And I'll show you how to enhance this functionality later, where it can actually call an API to get the respective cities and states of zip codes, but we're not there yet. We're going to save that later for Ajax. For now, I'm just going to hard code the value to be entered into this text box. So the way to do that is we first need to target that text box, and that's going to be the input tag with the hash, and the ID for that text box is right here. Okay, entered city state. So let's copy that, paste it here, and then give the .val method. And to this .val method, I'm going to give an argument, and that argument is going to be some text. I can just say New Jersey. All right, so no matter what the user enters here, they could put any old number, hit get location, and whoops, it's not actually displaying the NJ text here. Let's see why. Okay, I didn't have this file saved, and also make sure you put a semicolon, but that's not the reason why it wasn't working. I actually didn't save this file. So now that it's saved, I'm going to open this, refresh this page, and now enter any old number and hit get location, and it shows New Jersey here. Now we can, of course, whatever the user entered here, we can display that into this text box. All right, and you've already seen how to do that. We can capture whatever was entered in a variable, which we're doing here, and just display this as part of the value here. So we could do plus New Jersey. All right, and I could just say is for. So this is the characters that will be appended to this value, whatever the user enters. So we use a plus sign, and this is referred to as concatenation. We are concatenating both of these values. We are combining them together. This sentence right here, or set of words, we're combining them with the value of this variable. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Let's refresh the page here. I've saved that jQuery page, and I'm going to enter, for example, 07304. This is a zip code that I know of. If I hit get location, notice it's saying object object. Okay, the reason for that is because whatever value that was entered here is an actual object. We need to get the value of whatever that object is, and for that we of course need the .val. Okay, you may have forgotten about this. We did this up here. We need the .val method to extract whatever the data is entered into this element. Okay, and now the value that's going to be stored here is not going to be an object. It's actually going to be the actual value of this text box. And now let's go back, refresh the page. Let's enter that zip code again, 07304. Hit get location, and notice now it's appending that information with this set of words here. All right, so in this lesson you saw how to enter data into a text box and display that information to the screen using the alert function. And of course, most importantly, you saw that how we can take the data from a text box, store it into a variable, and then use that variable later on, as we're doing in the second example. All right, so we have a little bit more to cover in this lesson before we move on. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the events that we have here. For example, click and submit. This submit event works for the form. This click event works for any old button. Now you can have multiple events. Okay, so for example, we could be listening for multiple events for this element. So if a user, for example, let's change this to DBL, meaning double click. The instructions inside of this function are only going to run are only going to run when someone double clicks on this button. So let me save the file here. I changed that from click to double click, and now let's load the page and let's enter some zip code. Now if I click on this button just once, notice that nothing is happening. It's not displaying the zip code along with that, with those set of words in this text box if I just click it once. But now if I double click it, notice that it is reflected in the other text box because we changed the event to a double click. But we can have multiple events. So instead of just double click, I can also add the click event. So now this element is going to be responding to two events, not just a double click, but also a click. Okay, so let's go back. Let me refresh the page here, and if I enter some numbers here, and then if I just click it once, it's going to work. All right, let me refresh the page, enter some other gibberish here, double click this button. Of course, you know, since it listens to the first click, it's going to reflect here, but this is in fact responding to both the click as well as the double click. All right, because we have both of these events, this attribute is going to respond on both of these events. So notice there's no comma separating both of these. All there is a space. So just keep that in mind. A lot of people mix that up. With CSS selectors, when you need to add another selector, you would just put a comma and then put in the other selector. But with the event, you just have a space between two different events, okay? Now I want to cover one more kind of event, and that is focus, right? The focus event. When a user, for example, let me refresh the page here. When a user clicks inside of a text box like that, notice that this text box is in focus. If I click here, notice that this text box is in focus. If I click on here, notice that this text box is in focus. So this is a focus event that takes place. That can also be used in jQuery to respond to. Okay, we can listen to that event as well. So I want you to take this as an assignment. The assignment is when a user clicks on this particular text box right here, like this, as soon as they focus on it, this text should change to saying something like about to type. Okay, instead of just enter location, as soon as a user clicks into this text box and brings it into focus, this text is supposed to change to say about to type. So why don't you try that, pause the video on your own and give that a shot, and then you can resume to watch my solution. Okay, so hopefully you took the time to work on that on your own. It shouldn't have been too hard. All we have to do is first find that first text box in the second form, and that's this guy right here. Okay, when a user clicks into this text box, we'd like this text right here, enter location, to be changed to something else. So the first thing to do is listen to the focus event on that button. So for that, we're going to first need a CSS selector, and that's going to target the input pound entered underscore zip, okay, because that's the ID of this text box right here. Okay, entered zip. The next thing we need is the keyword on, and now is the focus event. All right, you've already seen click and double click, submit for forms. This is going to be the focus event. All right, and then we need a function, and as soon as a user focuses on that text box, the code that's in here is going to be executed. And what's that supposed to do? Well, that's supposed to change what's written here to something else. Take a note that this is the ID for this element, so I'm just going to copy that, city display. So let's first target that element, and that's city display. We need a hash sign before it, and since it's an h2 tag, I'll just be extra specific and just say h2 pound city display dot text to change the text, and I'm just going to change it to about to type, like that, and end that statement with a semicolon as usual. So let's refresh the page, and now if I focus, I can click here, I bring this into focus, nothing happens. I click here, nothing happens. I bring that into focus. When I click into this text box, this text is supposed to change. And boom, there you go. Notice that it changed to about to type. All right, so it's working as expected. So in this lesson, you learned about the submit event. This was a new event, and that's used to submit forms. So we need to target a particular form. If you have multiple forms, you'd have to reference the particular form with their respective ID, okay? And you also learned that you can have two events inside of these quotes, okay? And you separate those two events with a space. So this element is going to listen for two events, right? It's going to respond to both of these events, double click as well as click. And finally, you learned about an event called focus. When a user clicks on a text box and brings it into focus, you can capture that as well. And that's what we're doing here. We're changing the text. All right, so let me wrap it up here. This ended up being a pretty long video, but we covered a lot of ground. If you need to review some of this stuff, definitely take the time to understand it thoroughly before moving forward. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson. We're going to talk about how to add CSS classes and different attributes to HTML elements using jQuery. Now, you've already seen the add class method that we looked at several lessons ago, where you can assign a CSS class to a given element on a page. Well, there are other ways you can do this. And we're going to learn about the .css method. We're going to learn about the this keyword. It's going to be a new keyword introduced in this lesson. And then we're also going to learn about the different ways you can select specific elements. So there's a lot to cover. Let's get started. So please open up jQuery tutorial 8. That's where you're going to find the code. And we have a CSS folder in here. You can open that up. There's a file called style.css, and we're going to be using some of these style elements in our HTML code. And then in the JS folder, I've created a file called jQuery styling.js, which is empty at the moment, but we're going to be filling this up. And of course, the jQuery library is also there. Okay, and these files, the style sheet as well as the jQuery file that you're going to be coding in, is already linked to the HTML. So let's take a look at how this page looks currently. So it's just a simple page. We have a couple of paragraphs, and then this is an H4 tag, and then we have a button called style paragraphs. So we're going to do a couple of things with this page, and we're going to get practice on how to change the styles of these elements using jQuery and how to pick and choose specific things. And then we're going to learn about the this keyword. So as you should already be aware, we can add classes to certain elements. So for example, I can add a class here called Beautify. This is a class that I am aware of that I've created here in the CSS file called style.css. This class exists, okay? It has a dot prefix, so we know this is a class. So I'm giving this particular element the class Beautify. So now if I load the page, refresh it, notice that this is being reflected here. Whatever Beautify does is being done to the first paragraph here. Now if I want to add another class, we have a class called Blue Border. Okay, you can find the style elements here. All right, and all this does is basically creates a border with a dashed line, and it's a colored blue, and then it does some padding on the left and top. So let's see how this page looks now. I'm going to refresh and notice that it does the padding and does all that stuff. Okay, so you can add these specific classes to these elements, and if we add a class that doesn't exist, for example XYZ, and I refresh the page, of course that class doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything. It's a way for us to identify this paragraph in jQuery, but since this class doesn't exist, it doesn't have any style associated with it. It doesn't, of course, style anything. So let me revert it to the two classes here. Now if I want to add an ID to the second paragraph, I can give it any old ID, and I'll just call it any old underscore ID. And of course this ID doesn't exist in the style.css. Okay, we only have one ID, and that's this super. So I'm just giving it any old ID, and nothing's gonna change on the web page. But if I change this to super, we have a style element in the style.css for this super ID. So of course it's going to reflect that when we refresh the page, and so it does the dashed line with the color red. So you can apply these CSS elements to the actual HTML, and then you can of course do that using jQuery. And you saw the add class method where you can add different classes to existing HTML elements a couple of lessons ago. But I want to show you in this lesson how to do that in line, and I'll explain to you exactly what that means. So for example, we have h4 tag, and it has a class called boot. Okay, you can find that right here. This is the h4 tag, and it has the class boot. So I'm targeting that particular element, and I can just say .css and give it a color. Okay, and I'll give it the color red. So we are sort of giving specific style elements on the fly. Okay, we're not referring to any particular class. We're not doing the add class method. We're just calling .css and giving a color attribute with the value red. Right, and you can do this. This is called inline CSS. There's no class or ID associated with this style. We are literally creating it on the fly here in jQuery, which is pretty cool. So let me save this file and let's open up that page. I haven't refreshed this page yet, but basically I intend on this text right here. This is the h4 element. I want this to become the color red. Okay, so let's refresh the page and notice that it has turned to red. Alright, so we're doing this using jQuery. This is called inline styling in jQuery. Now, since h4 is there's only one h4 element on this page, we don't have to specifically refer to it with its class. We could just, get rid of the .boot here, do h4, and it's going to work exactly the same. Let me refresh the page and notice that this element is still red. Now, just like how I'm adding this color attribute with the value red, I can add multiple CSS attributes to a given element. Let me do that here on the next line. So let's target that h4 tag, and I'm going to say .css, and instead of one attribute and one value, I can pass in a map of keys and values. The key is going to be the particular attribute, and the value is going to be whatever we give it. So for example, if we want to give the color white, I'd have to do it like this. So I'm giving the color attribute with the value white. On the next line, I could say the background color should be the color gray. And then further, I could say that the font family, this is all CSS, but we're giving the keys and values. The font family could be Arial, Helvetica, and sans serif. I believe there's a dash here. Okay. Now this is all valid CSS code. We just, in CSS, we don't have, we typically don't surround with these quotes. As you can see, we're giving the colors as they are without the quotes. But when we're using them in jQuery, the key as well as the value should be surrounded by quotes. All right, that's really the only difference. And then from one key value set to the next, we just put a comma, as I'm doing right here after each one of these key values. Okay, so again, the first part is a key, and this is the value. Key, value, key, value. And the values could be multiple, so you separate them with a comma. Another thing I can give is the text align. I can make the text align be in the center. And that's, of course, going to also be surrounded by quotes. And then let's give it a padding of 10 px. And then finally, I'll give a line height 2 em. Okay, so this is all CSS that you should already somewhat be familiar with. Now, you don't have to be a master at it to understand what's going on. But basically, we've now styled this h4 tag with these key value styles on the fly. Okay, these styles don't exist in the style sheet. We're literally creating them on the fly here in jQuery. So let's refresh the page and see what happens. Boom. And this is being done using jQuery. So it's a really handy thing to know. A simple syntax, just do the .css method on any old element and apply either a list of key value attributes, or you could just give one attribute and one value to the CSS method. It will work the same way. Okay. But remember, if you have a list of these key values, you want to surround them with this curly braces, just as you would in a typical style sheet. Now, everything in jQuery or any programming language goes sequentially. So line by line, the code is executed. Up here, we are setting the style to be the color red, but we're changing it down here to white. If I copy and paste this again down here, everything else is still going to be intact. It's still going to have all of these style elements applied to the H4. It's just going to add another style here. So let me show you how that looks. Let me refresh the page. Notice that computers are cool is white, but if I refresh the page, that's going to turn red because that's what we are doing here. All right, so let me get rid of that because the red doesn't look that appealing at all. It's hard to read. So I'll refresh the page here so that it's back to white. So the next thing I want to cover is the this keyword. All right, this is a very important concept that you're going to be using throughout the course. So definitely pay attention in this lesson. The this keyword is crucial in jQuery as well as in JavaScript. Before that though, I'm just going to go back to the index.html page and remove some of these attributes. Okay, I'm just going to leave it to just the paragraphs. Okay, and for the H4 I'll just leave it as is. Let's see how this looks. Let's refresh the page and notice that only this computers are cool is the one that's being applied to CSS as this portion of the code is doing. Now let's talk about the this keyword. Let's first target the one and only button we have on the web page, and on the click event of this button we want the following code to be executed. All right, whatever's in here is going to be executed when the user clicks on the button element on the web page. And since we only have this one button on the web page, we don't have to specifically give any ID or anything like that. So let's say when the user clicks on the button, we want the paragraph tag. All right, we want the paragraph tags to be added a class. And you've seen the add class method. We have a class in the CSS called Beautify. So I'm just going to assign that class to the paragraph tag when a user clicks on the button. Let's refresh the page, click the button, and notice that the class Beautify is applied to all of the paragraphs. But let's say if we wanted to style this particular button with the same CSS, well, we could either do button.add class and then give it Beautify. Okay, and this should work. So let's refresh the page, click it, and notice that this gets beautified as well. But the better way of doing this is, instead of referring to the button that we have, we are already inside of this button element. So we could just refer to the keyword this. And this basically means whatever the user is interacting with. The user at this point is interacting with this button. So the this keyword is going to refer to that to the button element, the particular button that was clicked. Okay, let's refresh the page here, and it's going to work exactly the same way. Notice that the button is also beautified, and this will make more sense if I, for example, add another button down here and call this we'll just say some extra button. Let's go back to the web page, refresh. Now we have two buttons. We have the style paragraph that we had before, and we have this some extra button. If I click this, notice that only this particular button that I clicked is the one that was styled, because I'm using the this keyword. Okay, inside of this scope, inside of this button, this is referring to whatever you're interacting with, and that is that particular button that the user clicked on. Okay, instead of this keyword, if I change this to button and then refresh the page, and now if I click on it, notice that both of them get styled, and I don't want that. I want just this to be styled, the button that I interacted with, the button that I clicked on. And for that we need to make sure that we use the this keyword. Okay, refresh the page, click on this, and notice that only this button is the one that was changed. Now the cool thing is I can further do things with the this keyword. So I could say this dot on, give it another event. So we have an event inside of another event, and it's going to be called double click. So when a user double clicks on that button, we want something to happen, and I'll just give it another style. I could say this dot add class, and we can give it the class blue border. That's another class we have defined in our style sheet. Okay, so this event will only be available to us once we've already clicked the button once. Okay, once we click on this button, only then we'll have the ability to double click it and change its CSS to something else. So let's go back, let's refresh the page, All right, let me click on this and notice that the style is applied. If I click it once, nothing's happening. But if I double click on it, notice that that gets styled. Now I have a pop quiz question for you. What if I click on this button? What's going to happen? If I click on this button, take a look at the code, think about what's going to happen. Well, let's try it. Let's click on it and notice that this particular button's CSS is applied. Okay, so this one has not changed. We're referring to this button now. Okay, I click it once, double click it, and notice that now this is also basically that this keyword applies to the particular element that the user is interacting with. Okay, so we're highlighting all the buttons on the web page here, but the style elements that are going to be applied are only going to be applied for the particular button that we are interacting with. Okay, and that this keyword allows us to do exactly that. So we'll go over another example with the same idea. Let's say we want to target the paragraphs on the page. When a user clicks on a particular paragraph, we want the following to take place. And now I can say this dot CSS, and I'll just basically give it the same CSS we have up here. Okay. Now read this code and try to think about what's going to happen if I click on one of the paragraphs. What's going to happen? Let me go back to the web page, refresh it. If I click on one of these paragraphs, what's going to happen? Well, let's give it a shot. Let's click on it, and boom, notice that that paragraph has been applied the same styling. Okay, this paragraph is untouched, so the style is not going to apply to this because I'm using the this keyword. Okay, I want you to really drill this into your head so that you understand exactly what this means. That this keyword means the particular element that the user is interacting with. So if the user is interacting with this particular p tag, this particular one, right, the first p tag, that's the one that's going to be applied the CSS styling as shown here. Okay, so before I clicked on the first one, now let me click on the second one and notice that this is now being applied the CSS. Okay, so pretty cool that this keyword is a very handy thing to keep in mind and use in your jQuery code. Alright, so let me wrap it up here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson.